Hey everybody, how y'all doing? Welcome to the Blue Chip Podcast by fans for fans. This is your host Cody Potter. We're going to talk about the Commanders Chiefs preview. We're going to get into that. I appreciate you guys stopping by and checking us out. You can like, comment, subscribe. Be interactive with me. I'll answer any questions you guys have. If you guys have any notes or anything like that you want to talk about, I'll discuss it off in the comment section on YouTube and things on the page. Appreciate you guys sticking around. So into the Commanders Chiefs breakdown. It's going to be a rough game. The Chiefs are healthy, man. Rasheed Rice is back. They have Worley and Tyquan Thornton's playing pretty good football. Isaiah Pacheco hasn't necessarily been his normal self. It's been kind of a down year for him there. But between him and Kareem Hunt, they're still having an effective run game. Simmons, their first-round draft pick, is playing pretty good at offensive tackle. He and Connerly are both very athletic, very good, offensive tackle prospects out of this last draft. I felt like that was a player that they needed to pick. And they've retooled this offensive line multiple times, man. They've made it a precedent to really protect Patrick Mahomes ever since the Tampa Bay Super Bowl loss to they just they're a team, man, that has a quarterback that has played out of his mind ever since stepping on the field, man. I really like the Chiefs, because people talk about Jayden Daniels kind of being in that Patrick Mahomes type level, moving forward and things like that. And I don't think anything that's really happened this year has taken away from what Jayden Daniels offers you. I think going forward, once the roster gets to a certain level, I think this team will. They'll do a lot of things going forward. We've had a tough time playing Dallas with Jayden Daniels. That it's something that's got to be cleaned up. Divisional games are always tough. We've really just underperformed every time we've played them. They have our number right now, and that's something you really don't want to hear about. We've played Philly pretty tough, even though I feel like, we've made a lot of mistakes against Philly with Jayden Daniels and things like that. We still got 2 games ahead for Philly. We still got one more game against the Giants. The season isn't over, but, the injuries are piling up. There is some good news. I think we're finally going to see Terry McLaurin and Deebo Samuel on the field. How long does it take them to get going for this season? It might take a few games. Marcus Mariota is going to start against KC. KC's a hostile environment to play in on Monday night. The Chiefs get a lot of favorable calls, but we're not going to talk about that. I don't really give anything into the referees. If you got to beat them, you got to beat them too. Good teams got to do it. If you want to get a win in the NFL, you got to beat whatever the flow of the game throws your way. This is going to be a tough game for this team, man. Tackling has been a huge issue for this team moving forward. From week 1 of the season, it kind of reared its head. And then we've had injuries ever since week 1, and it's just continuously piled up. Whether, getting the scheme right, getting guys, in continuity on defense, it's just something that's been lacking so far this season. Not having Jayden Daniels out there, it's bothering me because now it's the narrative of, is he injury prone? Is it this? Is it that? Let's just be real, man. He got hurt on a hip drop tackle in the Green Bay game. Got hit on a free rusher, where there was more guys coming than you had blocking in the scheme. Then Marcus Mariota came in, threw a pick six, kind of like put the game out of the way. In Dallas. So, Jayden Daniels is going to miss his 3rd game of the season. He didn't miss any games last year. He was taken out of the last game in the Dallas game to kind of get right for the playoffs. We came back, we won the game with Marcus Mariota. Marcus Mariota is a capable quarterback, man, and I think he really does fit, just even knowing the expectations for being a number 2 overall pick, but there are a lot of comparisons to Patrick Mahomes and Jayden Daniels. Both have a mobile element to their game. Of course, Jayden Daniels is a lot more explosive, to where, Mahomes is a much bigger guy who is just so smart. He beats you in so many ways down the field. The team blocks for him, that he uses his mobile element, to really torch teams too. And then you have the success, from year 1 in the system. Patrick Mahomes didn't play till his 2nd year, but, the biggest thing is the difference in the team. The dynamic for where each team was is 2 different locations, man, completely. Andy Reid and the Chiefs, they traded up for Patrick Mahomes. They were a competitive team before. They were in the playoffs every year with Alex Smith. They had veteran leadership. They were a proven winner. They were getting to the playoffs every year. They were competing in the division. They had Travis Kelce. And they have veterans on that team, man. And, they got Chris Jones, who's a dominant player. We're going to have to highlight on him this week. He's just a very impactful player in his own right, man. Very disruptive up the middle. Deron Payne gives us something similar to that, but he's never played at an all-pro level like Chris Jones has. He's a perennial all-pro. But you get to get all-pro nods when your team is competing, and that's just something we haven't ever really done with Deron Payne on this field, playing to the level he is this year or in his contract year. Very evident, obviously, with these picks that nobody's picking us to win this game, and that's fine. The biggest thing for this team isn't about, going in here, whether we're going to talk about winning or losing right now. You're a sub 500 team. So the sub 500 team is how do you fix certain things, man? How do you create the identity that you set out this offseason to, be? For me, there's a lot of things that go into this team that it really needs to work on going forward. There's a lot of things that you're not seeing on offense and on defense. I felt like, watching this team, a lot of the biggest things that I'm seeing when I watch this team are the simple fact that, we're not playing team first football, when it comes to what I'm seeing from the safety position, what I'm seeing from the defensive end position, which we knew coming into the season was a whole, everybody that's going to call into the radio is going to talk about the defensive end position and the fact that, certain players are not playing up to par, what you need from the defensive end position. You knew that coming into the season that it was going to be something that was going to be schematic, done by rotation. That was talked about all preseason for me. Something that has really reared its head that I didn't think was going to be an issue this year was the back end play. I was a proponent for not really wanting Jeremy Chin to leave. I do like Will Harris as a player. I think he's a fine player. He's a little bit better in coverage than Jeremy Chin is, but I don't think he's quite the level of player that, in the tackling and things like that. I think Jeremy Chin's a much better man coverage guy, to where I think Will Harris is a much better zone coverage guy. This team wants to play more man. They want to play man defense, and for some reason this offseason, man, this whole season, where we've been on soft zones and things like that on big third downs. Whether it's schematic because they were giving up plays early in the season when they were playing in man, base man defense or press man or whatever it is. Trey Amos is doing a good job. I've seen reports where it's saying Mikey Samerstill, for even as much as they're knocking Marshawn Lattimore and his numbers, Mikey Samerstill's are even worse. Numbers can be skewed, if you're watching like the all 22. Like if I was to put up here like a all 22 of our defense, I could show you probably about 10 plays where pre-snap you're seeing Mikey Samerstill say certain things. Now I can show you about 15 of them, and I can show you where they turn out really good. Mikey Samerstill had 3 opportunities at interceptions where he's communicating with Marshawn Lattimore. On 2 of them, he got 1 pick and then dropped 1. And then there was another play where he was in communication pre-snap with Trey Amos, which resulted in another pick. The biggest thing that I'm bringing this up for is because while I'm showing you some all-22 cut-ups of like Jayden Daniels and the difference between him this year and last year, the thing with Mikey Samerstill is he's a really good player. He's a slot player. He didn't get to play that position last year, but there's moments where I see him communicating with our defense. When he's communicating with the corners, for what everybody wants to say about our corner play, it is struggling. You always get highlighted Marshawn Lattimore. We're always highlighting Marshawn Lattimore. We're always highlighting Mikey Samerstill. Well, a lot of times when you're grading these defenders, a lot of times they're basing it off who's the closest guy to the player. Or did the player run down the field with him and he got beat? Sometimes what I'm seeing pre-snap to what I'm watching the play is Mikey Samerstill's calling out a number. He's pointing at a guy. He's looking back at the safety. When he's communicating with the safety ends up being flat-footed with his eyes on the quarterback, and I watched the player going over the top. Mikey Samerstill was actually supposed to fade into a different zone or shadow a different player. He's basically just trailing that player to pass him off, and then he looks back and he sees the safety's not going to be in position, and he continues to run down the field with that player. So Mikey Samerstill gets credited for giving up a touchdown. It's happened 3 times this year where he's communicated with a safety. He's telling him he's going to drop him off, around the 10 yards. behind him, I see him looking back to drop him off, and then he sees the safety's not even in position. And he runs down the field with the player, and of course he's already beat because he's not even supposed to be on that player. He's supposed to actually drop down into a zone. And because he didn't drop down into that zone, the quarterback didn't throw the ball there because the other player was running free up the sideline or something like that, up into the seam. It was two of the plays were a seam, and one was down the sideline. So you're crediting Mikey Samerstill with these plays, but realistically, man, it's a big issue with what I'm seeing so far with this team. Is really not so much the cornerback play. I mean, yes, Marshawn Lattimer's given a place, but I see Marshawn Lattimer in position, and then it's one-on-one with the safety coming over late. Again, it's more on the safety play than it is on the cornerback play. A quarterback can only be in a certain position. If the quarterback makes a perfect throw, as we know with Jayden Daniels, a perfect throw you can't cover. It just is what it is. So we knock Marshawn Lattimer all the time because, yes, he is a little bit physical. Referees are clearly eyeing it out for him. They're going to throw flags on him. They're also going to... he just doesn't get the benefit of the doubt. And it just is what it is at this point. When you're losing and things just spiral on you, it just happens to be that way. But, I'm not sticking up for Mikey Samerstill in any way because he's one of my favorite players on the team, and I expect a really, really high level out of this guy. He's a guy that has all-pro type talent at the nickel position. He can play that position very well. He's shown he can cover tight ends. He's shown that he can break up passes in the slot. He's a very shifty cornerback. He's very good. There's plays in the Dallas game where you watch him, he's right on CeeDee Lamb, he's breaking up plays. And most of those plays that he does good, you see him break up. Him and Marshawn Lattimore or him and Trey Amos are communicating very, very well, which is pivotal in the back end, man. The communication on the back end for cornerbacks and safeties is pivotal. It's the only way you can even compete and have a top-level defense in this league. When we're giving up plays, the communication just isn't there. And that's what I've noticed when I watch the All-22. It's something that's going to have to be corrected, man. Everybody talks about how to fix this defense. Well, I mean, the biggest way to fix the defense is have everybody know their assignment, man. It's a lot easier said than done. Jeremy Chin was a guy that really, really fit the scheme last year. While he missed some tackles, of course, I'm not saying that he was perfect, but he supplemented a lot of things because of his skill set that really masked a lot of deficiencies that we had last year. Like Bobby Wagner last year was not any better running sideline to sideline than he is this year. But Jeremy Chin was basically that extra linebacker in the box who could get back and cover guys in man, and he was just a better piece that fit, I felt like. Even Will Harris, for everything that you're seeing with this defense right now, Will Harris has been injured for quite a few games now, but against like Tucker Kraft and things like that, he's much better in zone. So when he was locked up with Tucker Kraft and Kraft was just torching him. That was something that Jeremy Chin did a much better job of last year. Not saying he didn't give up plays at the tight end position, but it really was only against Philadelphia and, Ferguson. He did a really good job last year, and I think that had a little bit to do with Ferguson's injury and the quarterback play in Dallas. I think it's part supplemented with that because Ferguson's having a really good year again, because he is a really good player. But that said, Jeremy Chin was just such a good fit for this defense, and he masked a lot of things on the back end because he had the skill set to be the extra linebacker kind of in the box who could and was rangy enough and smart enough and communicated. I mean, communication was the biggest thing with why. It's funny to me that this year we have better corners and we're getting beat more often. To me, it's more on the communication aspect of the game. I don't see cornerbacks just blown completely out of the way. I'm not saying you don't see Marshawn Lattimore get beat on double moves or give up some separation or whatever, but a lot of times when I see him get beat over the top, he's in a good position. There's some hand fighting going on, whatever. They might call a penalty here and there, but like at the end of the day, that's just the NFL game. If a player's going over the top, he's trying to compete for the ball. I've seen him with his head back and he still gets flagged. So I mean, you can blame Marshawn Lattimore all you want, but at the end of the day, if a player gets called, they get called. It's what the referees see. But when you watch him kind of get his head back and he's putting his hands up at the last minute because he's reading the wide receiver's eyes, which is what you're taught to do, it's just nitpicky at this point. So we can hate on Marshawn Lattimore all we want, but when I go back and watch the tape, yes, like there are bad games. I've seen him have two really, really bad games. I'm not excusing any of it. Same thing with Mikey Samerstill. You're seeing him have bad moments, but a lot of times there's supposed to be a safety over the top to help him. And the safety play with. I mean, we all love Jeremy Reeves, what he gives you on special teams. He's a really good special teams ace, but There's a reason he's a special teams ace, and he has not really ever been a consummate, guy that's ever held down the strong safety position because he's okay in the run fits. He brings a physical presence, but he's not the rangiest guy in the world. Like, he doesn't play to his speed that he plays on special teams because he's played special teams for years. He hasn't played the safety position on the field and gotten the reps for years outside of preseason. So again, there's a difference between being able to run a certain speed and then playing at a certain speed. And that safety position has been the biggest position for me that has not masked other positions like it did last year. I'm not saying that, we don't need to pick a linebacker to replace Bobby Wagner. We do going forward. You need to have linebackers that can go both ways, rangy. Frankie Louvu is 30 years old now, but Frankie Louvu still has some really good football in him. Now, do we need to get somebody behind him that can play more of the linebacker position and just let Frankie Louvu be that hybrid, kind of like spy piece and just let him kind of do his thing and, give him kind of like his own responsibilities? Probably. And I think that's why they've made picks like Cam Drano and like Jordan McGee going forward. And I think those guys have a role on this team going forward. It was just always going to take some time to develop. There's a reason you're picking them guys in the 4th, 5th, 6th round. So again, it's just going to take some time with this, but there's the strong safety position, the linebacker position, it's been a critical position as just seeing guys out of position. The guy on the back end is not making up for the guy that's out of position on the front end, and we're missing tackles, and we're not swarming to the ball like we did last year. Last year, we were just much more efficient at playing 11-man defense, where if a guy, there were a couple games where it was bad. The Philly game was really, really stood out to me, last year. This year, it's rearing its head in every game. And the funny thing to me is the front end play has actually been better. And, when you look at what we had last year with, we had 10 sacks from the boy who went to Dallas, Dante Fowler Jr. He was more of a pass, rushing defensive end, was constantly getting beat in the run game. So we had to have the personnel. Cleveland Farrell would come in the game, play the run, on run fit downs, and then, Dante Fowler Jr. would just get to come in and play the pass sets. But we also stayed healthier last year. So there's no continuity on the front. What I'm seeing from the interior of this defense, man, is they are playing the run fits much, much better. But you see the linebacker play is just not excelling and coming up and hitting the hole like they need to do. And you're seeing guys just start getting to the second level clean. And the safety play is not cleaning it up like it was last year. Again, not saying Jeremy Chin didn't get beat. There was plays, and defenders, it just happens, man. Like some plays the offense just execute much better, and that just happens, especially in the Philly game last year, especially in the playoffs and things like that. But again, more consistently last year, those guys were doing their job. Those guys were in a better position, and they were cleaning up things that aren't being masked this year, and that's just rearing its head. And that's part of having an aged defense. Bringing in Dietrich Wise, of course, huge loss. We played the run pretty good against the Giants week 1. Everybody was healthy. You lost Dietrich Wise. Then, you started losing other players. You lost Javonte Jean-Baptiste, like the Atlanta game. Then now you're losing Dorrance Armstrong, who's your leading sack getter. Von Miller is a pass rushing specialist. Him and Martin have been kind of rotating in and out. Now you're going to have to play those guys even more. Last week, what I started to see from the Dallas game was we went more into like a 3-4 defense, where what they did was they put Frankie Louvu on the edge. They put Jordan McGee and Bobby Wagner inside, which I like that, and it was effective in some sets. But again, to try to do this mid-season, it's going to take some weeks to get some continuity there. And honestly, getting Jordan McGee on the field, and something that we don't really do is that 3-4 defense. So, Jordan McGee, this is all new for everybody. Now, that said, we do have the personnel to run that because we have, the one from the Bears, Eddie Goldman. Eddie Goldman has played nose tackle with the Chicago Bears, throughout probably the majority of his career. Deron Payne was playing in the 3-4 with Washington, back when we had Chase Young, Montez Sweat, guys like that. We ran a lot of 3-4 defense under Ron Rivera and things like that. And then even under Jay Gruden, we ran a lot of 3-4 like nickel defense, so we have the guys to play in that position. Then you have Kinlaw, who's also a big 3-4 defensive end. So, you got Deron Payne and Javon Kinlaw at the 3-4 defensive end spots. And that's a really good spot for Jerzon Newton as well, man. Jerzon Newton has every pass rush ability, to be that 3-4 defensive end, man. That's actually a dynamic position for him. I felt like that was always going to be something he would excel in. in pass rush sets, which, teams don't run the 3-4 shell like they used to do back in the Bill Belichick days. But, it's something that's kind of phased out. But it is a really good defense to try to stop the run. That said, moving forward, if we're going to run that 3-4 look more often than what we have to get more linebackers on the field to hopefully clean more gaps up, you still got to have the safety play to be able to play to the second level. But I do like the idea of having Eddie Goldman at the nose, Deron Payne and, Kinlaw on your run sets as your defensive ends. Then you got Martin, who is more of a 3-4 tradition. He's a 3-4 defensive end, outside linebacker size. Von Miller has more experience in the 3-4 outside linebacker. He's a perfect size for that. Basically, the biggest thing is a 4-3 defensive end is more in the 260 range, 260, 270, to where 3-4, outside linebacker, they're more in like the 240, 250 range, but there's two of them guys, and then you have more big guys in the middle, and it's just a defensive set that we just haven't ran here. So I think it will take some time, but I do like the fact that Jordan McGee gets in on the field in those sets because he gives you more sideline to sideline things, and that allows him to be in communication with Bobby Wagner to start seeing things, and it just gives him more reps. So I really like that idea going forward. Again, it's going to take some time. We're still going to have some whiffs with it, and just defenses do give up things. But in a game that you're coming up against the Chiefs on, I think that 3-4 defensive front might be a really good idea. When they got Kareem Hunt, they got, Isaiah Pacheco, who has speed and things in his own right. And both of them are physical backs, so you're probably going to want that more physical front built up there with two speed guys coming off the edge in Frankie Louvu, whether it's Von Miller, Jacob Martin. So again, as far as the cornerback position goes, everybody's calling for Marshawn Lattimore. I mean, I think there is a world where, if he just continues to struggle out wide, or if they start, keying Rashee Rice outside on him and they aren't moving him around because they want to match that matchup. I don't know, maybe you do put Mikey Sanders still back outside, bring in Noah Igbenogany and just have him play the slot, maybe get Marshawn Lattimore off the field if teams are just going to start isolating that matchup and just keep throwing balls over the top looking for pass interference and things like that. You just can't continue to give up plays like that. That's something that this defense can also try to do to kind of clean things up for this year. There's a lot of things that are going to have to go into it. I mean, but ultimately at the end of the day, the communication has to be better. The flowing to the ball has to be better. And honestly, just simply executing your assignment is going to have to be better for this defense to make a better impact on the game. Do I think we beat the Chiefs? Probably not. Between Marcus Mariota, I mean, they're just playing really good football there with Kansas City right now. Who's going to cover Travis Kelce? I mean, there's a lot of things, if you give up any hole in your zone defense, man, trust me, this defense is not really built on playing zone for me. If you ask me, I think Bobby Wagner can do it, but he's a little bit slow. So, if Kansas City sees Bobby Wagner in a certain position with Travis Kelce out there, man, they're going to exploit it all day, every day, to where I think maybe this might be a game where you got to put, Jordan McGee on the field a little bit more to maybe be able to have that speed at that position to kind of like try to isolate a little bit better and kind of counteract what Travis Kelce is going to do in the middle of that field, because Frankie Louvu's not the guy to do that as well. So again, it's personnel things that are going to get corrected going forward. Everybody wants to fire Joe Whitt. There was a ton of excitement coming off of last year. A lot of things that, were being masked by how great the offense was playing because we were controlling the clock, because we were healthy and we were playing our best football. Well, hopefully getting Terry McLaurin back, hopefully Deebo Samuel being healthy, hopefully we can just get off this field healthy against, Kansas City and then get Jayden Daniels back and actually see what this offense can be under Cliff Kingsbury with what I think is a more impactful running game. But we can't have an impactful running game if you don't have your top 2 or 3 wide receivers. I mean, it's just not even possible, man. I mean, just the personnel matchups and the things that these coaches are trying to coach through with all these injuries. I mean, for everything we want to say, there is no excuses in football, but you're not going to be competitive without your top 3 receivers. You're not going to be competitive without your top 3 defensive ends that you came into the season with, whether they were going to be great or not. We didn't have no, prime era, Von Miller. We got 36-year-old Von Miller. We don't have no T.J. Watt. We don't have a Trey Hendrickson or a Micah Parsons or anything like that. That was always going to be something that came later in this build after, the selections that we've made so far in these first 2 years. I expect that to be something that they address this offseason, probably doubling up at the defensive end position, whether it's through free agency or the draft. Both have a very, very bright array of talent, which is something that I kind of keyed on my last episode, talking about the free agent fits and the draft fits for this team. But again, you got to go best player available. So free agency is something that I expect us to throw some money at the defensive end position. And I'm not talking about just a couple Jag guys. I'm talking, they're probably going to try to sign more of a top five guy that's coming out onto the market, whether it's, AJ Epinesa, Trayvon Walker from, Jacksonville, if they let him walk, if they're not franchising him, which I think they would, just for what it is. But again, you can't continue to bring in the Dietrich Wises and the aged Von Millers and, these role pieces, the Dante Fowler Juniors. Again, we didn't expect Dorrance Armstrong to have the type of year that he was having until this point. Just like last year, we didn't expect the same thing with Dante Fowler Jr., but at some point you got to put real asset at that position and to rebuild the roster in the manner that they have, focusing on the offensive line, the quarterback position, and excelling this offense for the quarterback. I mean, realistically, we needed veteran receivers like Terry McLaurin, like Deebo Samuel, to take some of the things off of Jayden Daniels' shoulders by knowing that these guys are veteran players. They know where to be in certain down distance and things like that, like Zach Ertz. Now, at some point, Jayden Daniels has to show that he can excel at the quarterback position, which he has. He knows what he's doing, but he has to have confidence in the guys that are out there to do it. So far this year, playing without Terry McLaurin, Jalen Lane, he's flashed in certain positions. He's, so is Luke McCaffrey in certain spots, but it's got to be a consistent thing. And they have to show that they can, earn Jayden Daniels' trust in all critical positions. And that's going to be a part of their development going forward. Same with Ben Sinnott and things like that going forward. Again, man, it's just a fun little thing, the season's not over. No matter where we finish, we can be a sub 500 team this year. It doesn't really change the trajectory of this team going long term with all the injuries that this team has had. You could tell me that we make a run. I think the most critical thing about this season will be probably these next 4 games. None of them get easy. You have the Seahawks, you have Detroit, you have Philly, in Kansas City right now. These are 4 of the best teams in the NFL. So, realistically, if you can get Jayden Daniels back and healthy for 3 of these next 4 games, you have Terry McLaurin healthy. Maybe he's up to speed after this Kansas City game. He kind of gets right. Hopefully, there's no setbacks and things like that. Again, Deebo Samuel, get a full array of weapons to move forward with this. No matter what happens in this game, realistically, man, you just want to see this team start to execute and perform better and live up to the expectations that they have for themselves, regardless of injuries, regardless of everything. Start playing better to the scheme, but you want to see the coaches start to make some adjustments too, man, because... And you saw it in Dallas, like I was just talking about, with the 3-4 scheme and things like that. Maybe you have to do more of that with the personnel that you have left over the season, because injuries are a thing in football. There's no excuses. It's just part of the game. But you can't have your team fall off the level that, And I don't think this team's really necessarily falling off the level in a cliff. We just ran into a buzzsaw with Dallas, and they whooped our ass. And honestly, we came off of a tough last-second loss against the Bears that, is a game that you expect to win. And honestly, 9 times out of 10, I think we do win. Played good enough to win, but we shot ourselves in the foot with the execution and the turning the ball over. So again, it's just something that's got to be cleaned up. Every game has had its own entity for what we've done to lose that game. Starting fast is just something that has eluded this team, whether it's on defense, whether it's on offense, whether it's the mistakes or something like that. We kind of had an opportunity in the Bears game to start fast. We gave up a touchdown. Then we threw an interception. Then the defense started to really step up and then things like that. And then at the end of the game, the defense kind of missed some plays because our offense kept putting them in the position. Again, it's playing 3-phase football, and then it's the coaches making, certain subtle changes throughout the course of the game to get what the players are seeing and then put them in a position to make the plays going forward. We just haven't been as clean as we were last year, man, and it is what it is. Injuries aside, whatever it is, the team overall, roster-wise, without that truly dynamic edge player, the Super Bowl aspirations are always going to be us over-exceeding the talent level to the roster without that type of player. Without having, really, really good, red to blue back-end safeties, that can communicate and keep everything in front of them. So the big plays, the explosives, man, the explosives are killing us, and that showed its head last year in certain games, but there were a lot of games last year that the explosives weren't present, and I felt like a lot of that had to do with the communication on the back end with Jeremy Chin, a really good run player, a guy that could communicate, play man, and certain things like that, because this team wants to play man, and some of the personnel that we have in there right now were more predicated to having to play zone, which isn't a strength of a few players on this defense, which is like Marshawn Lattimore and Jeremy Breeze and things like that. Will Harris is a little bit more built for the zone defense than, the rest of these guys. But Will Harris, again, is not out there and he's not healthy. So again, it's just the collection of things with this team. Do we want it to get better? Do we want to see some things get cleaned up? Do we want to be competitive? Of course we do. But there are a lot of bright things coming forward for this team, no matter where this season ends up. So again, it's just about trying to keep your cool, trying to understand what's really, really going on schematically, and just understanding that this is year 2 of a rebuild. For as exciting as it was last year, injuries happen. Last year we were pretty damn injury free, and the critical injuries didn't even. The first one really honestly came in the Sam Cosmi going down in the Detroit game in the playoffs. And that kind of honestly seems like it started the outlook for this season, because in Philly we got our ass kicked, and then this season we've had injuries after injuries, and we've continued to get our ass kicked in certain aspects of the game. So again, you just see the overall position of this roster. It's not deep enough to really sustain a lot of these things. Year 3, year 4 in this rebuild, as we start to get key guys critical, and you start to make free agent signings and things like that to get all the personalities that you want, not just as starters, but as backups and things like that. You draft more players to be your core going forward that can come in and play pivotal roles on this team. We will start to see this team be much deeper and be more prepared to handle injuries. Now, that said, every team deals with injuries, when you have certain guys go down, it just tailspins your season, and we all know that it's happened. I mean, how good have the San Francisco 49ers been all them years? They still ended up with the number 2 overall pick and landed Nick Bosa all them years that they were competitive. The Kansas City Chiefs, they are a Patrick Mahomes injury away from being a top 10 pick team. I mean, just is what it is. It's just how the NFL is. And when you're playing half of your season without your star quarterback and Jayden Daniels, and he's not developing and things like that, and then he doesn't even have his wide receivers on the field when he is on the field, it's hard to stay above 500 in this league, man. So, I mean, again, with the defense that we have and the collection of talent that we have, being the second year in the system, coming off of a Ron Rivera-led team that we don't even have any first-round picks left over from. So, again, it's just the state of this roster. Hopefully we can get a lot of things cleaned up in season that will lead you, to say, hey, Jordan McGee is going to be a really good piece for us going forward. Maybe we only need a certain type of linebacker at that position or something like that. Maybe somebody else steps up. It just is what it is. We're going to see certain personnel, groupings and things like that. And some of these things might be certain things that we shine with going forward, like rushing from the 3-4 position, putting Jerzon Newton at the 3-4 DN spot, because he just shows that he excels in that position, even more so than rushing at the, at the B spot, at the 2-gap spot, running from the nose tackle position. So again, we'll see what it is. Again, I appreciate you guys checking out the Blue Chip Podcast by fans for fans. This was the Chiefs preview for the Commanders game. Monday night is prime time. Win, lose, or draw, man, there's going to be good things to take about it. I watched all 22 and get back into it. And, college football is this week, man. So, just enjoy the amount of football that we got left this year, man, because, we all know how it is all offseason when, we have no football. We're all wishing we could have one of those, Cleveland Brown, Jacksonville Thursday night games when it's, midsummer and things like that, and there's no football going on. So, again, thank you guys for checking out the Blue Chip Podcast by fans for fans. This is your host, Cody Potter. Have a blessed day. Peace.